Well, welcome to Spirit Sparkles. We've been working on this for quite some time, and so I'm pleased to offer you this little short, maybe 10-minute or so presentation. I chose to concentrate on the two Carmelites, St. Teresa of Avila and St. Therese of Lisieux. And I wanted to focus on the importance of prayer and help you get a little sense of their lives. Certainly in 10 minutes on two, I'm not going to give you a lot, but a little overview. I think it's important to know that these two saints lived over 358 years apart in terms of the timeline. Teresa of Avila was born in 1515 and Teresa of Lisieux was born in 1873. What's going on in Avila's time is you have the Protestant Reformation, the Council of Trent, the Spanish Inquisition, and that backdrop is really important because when you read Teresa of Avila, she's always so concerned about knowing what her spiritual director would consider correct, proper, totally dependent upon them. And on top of that, which sort of escaped me, is she really didn't have access to reading the actual Bible. So anything she has about Scripture that she reads is from a book that someone else has written and maybe quoted a few passages from the Bible. So that's something to think about when you think how lucky we are today. Teresa of Lisieux did have access to the Scriptures themselves. She also relied a lot on the book of The Imitation of Christ by Thomas à Kempis, which is really a very good book and still very, very important in people's spiritual development. So about John of the Cross, one of the reasons that he was so valuable to Teresa of Avila is that he was both knowledgeable as well as a very holy man himself. And when you read her book, she'll say, you know, I would prefer, of course, for spiritual direction, a priest who is both knowledgeable and holy. But if I don't have both, I will certainly prefer to have a learned man over a holy man, because at least the learned man has the skills to guide me, even though he may not be as fully developed or practiced in it himself. A little bit about the rest of their life story. As you know, Teresa of Avila lived till about maybe the age of 67, so she practiced that life 47 years. Teresa of Lisieux lived to about 24 years, and she lived the Carmelite life for 9 years, which is quite a short period of time. Both of them were canonized saints, of course, and both of them were canonized doctors of the church. And when you read their writings, you begin to understand why. In terms of their family, I was surprised to learn, I guess it was in the books all along, but it seemed to escape my awareness. Teresa of Avila's grandfather was actually Jewish, and at that time period, the Jews were again very much scrutinized and prejudiced and held against and all of that. And so her father converted to Christianity. And then there was big suspicion about that, and so then he lost all of his property and wealth and so on. And so then her father and so on moved to be with another relative who was a farmer. And apparently they raised the silkworms, and so in her writing sometimes she'll talk about the silkworm, but also that they were in the cloth merchants making fabric. Both parents of the two saints were very strict, firm believers in their faith. Teresa of Avila's father had married first a woman who gave him 2 children, and she died after childbirth. Then he married Teresa of Avila's mother, and she gave him 10 children. So together, Teresa says, we had 9 boys and 3 girls in our family. In Teresa of Lisieux's family, her parents, Louis and Zélie, originally both wanted to be religious themselves, but for various reasons the congregations that they applied to rejected them, so they met eventually and married, and they had 9 children. 4 of their children died as infants, and then the 5 girls that we know about all became sisters or entered the convent. 4 of them went to Carmel, and 1 went to the Byzantine order, and I'll talk about that a little bit. You may know that just recently, I think it was 2018, her parents, Louis and Zélie, were canonized saints, and I discovered in doing the research just recently that Leonie, the last sister that I mentioned who entered the Byzantine order, is also being processed possibly for sainthood. And her story is really, I guess, a heroic one, if you want. She entered the Poor Clares and was sent home. She entered the Byzantines twice and was sent home. She entered them a 3rd time, and she persevered, and she died as a sister of the Visitation. I think it was health primarily that caused her to be sent home most of the time. In terms of their early lives, Teresa of Avila was quite the little fashion socialite, all of that kind of thing. And after her, I should have mentioned that both of their mothers died. After Teresa of Avila's mothers died, she was 10 at the time, or 12 maybe. Her father was concerned about some of the company she was keeping, particularly some of her cousins, so he wanted to get her away. So once her older sister married, he used the excuse that she didn't have a chaperone, and so he sent her to the Augustinian convent. In terms of Teresa of Lisieux's parents, of course, her mother died, poor thing, when she was only 4. And so she took one of her blood sister, Pauline, she called her second mama. And then after a certain point, Pauline went to the convent, and then her father decided to send Therese to one of the convent schools as well. And fortunately for her, one of her blood aunts happened to also be a sister there, so she had a little family supervision as well. In terms of their maturity, or even their spiritual development, I guess you could say, lots of times historians like to look at what were they like when they were children. So we have the story of Teresa of Avila deciding she wants to see God. And so she talks her brother Rodrigo into running off to fight the Moors and become martyrs, because her understanding is at that time that if you want to see God, you have to die to see God. So that's a little scary. But her uncle finds the 7-year-olds tripping off out the door and grabs them and takes them home, so they never get to attempt to find the Moors. Teresa of Lisieux, at an early age, one Christmas, would be after her mother had died, decided that she was asking her father, well, should she put her shoes out for whatever little treats she expected to get? And she overheard him kind of grumbling to one of her older sisters that Teresa really needs to grow up and get over all this childish stuff. And so that's the first time when she really kind of seriously thinks about, you know, I really shouldn't be so selfish. I should think about other people. So that's kind of some of the early stories about these people. Two other common elements that we have about the two of these saints is that at an early age, or maybe not so early for Teresa of Avila, after she had entered the convent, she became quite ill. And the methods of medicine in those days were not the best. Remember, they're into leeches and bleedings and all that kind of thing. So whatever was wrong with her, eventually her family took her home, took care of her, and she recovered a little bit better. But in the process, she prayed to St. Joseph, and she really believed that through his intercession she was healed. Teresa of Lisieux, when she was a child, this is before she entered, she also was very ill. And in their home they had a white statue of the Virgin Mary. And she prayed to Mary, and she believed that she saw the Virgin Mary smile at her. And that was her reassurance that she would be healed, and of course she was. So those are some of the elements together with those two. One of the things that I really want to talk about is the prayer of these two people. When you read Teresa of Avila, it's really quite an intricate description, and she goes into all kinds of metaphors, and sometimes when I read her, I get dizzy just reading her. I find John of the Cross, who is also obviously a Carmelite, easier to follow, but his is very deep, and sometimes you may feel really drawn down into the darkness that he talks about. Teresa of Lisieux really didn't, according to what I've read, didn't necessarily read that much about Avila, but she really did concentrate on John of the Cross and, as I said, Thomas à Kempis' imitation of Christ. So those are kind of the things that they relied upon. But the prayer, and you know, most people like Teresa of Lisieux because she's simple. She just says, I raise my arms to the Lord and I ask God to lift me up like a child would be lifted up. Teresa of Avila has all these supernatural experiences. Some of the commentaries say Teresa of Lisieux really didn't have those extraordinary experiences. Hers was very, very simple, as she says. So sometimes it's distracting to read all of these adventures, I almost want to say, or experiences of Teresa of Avila. But there's a lot of good grounded advice in what she writes about. So both of them talk about this great, great love of God, being loved by God, giving their love back to God. And the imagery that is often used in most of these mystical writers is that of marriage. So you have them describing the progression of their prayer relationship with God as if it were a betrothal, as if it were marriage, as if it were union. And the union is of the affections and of the will. So that not only do I have great love for God, but I have this great desire to make my will the will of the Lord. And that is carried out then in action. And in the description of Avila in her great reform efforts, and after much prayer, concluded that really the mission of the Carmelite sisters was to pray for the church, to pray for the battles of the church, to pray in zeal for the conversion of souls. And so their life of prayer and penance primarily was to be that. And so she said to the sisters, our vocation is to be contemplatives and intercessors for the church. Teresa of Lisieux, in some of her writings about the vocation, you may be familiar with the common one where she says, really, I came to the conclusion that my vocation is love. And she says, at the summit of Carmel, one is crucified with Christ, and one is entirely given to the works for his glory. She said, I came to Carmel in order to pray for priests and the conversion of sinners. She also had a great desire to be a missionary, and if she had been healthy, she probably would have gone to one of the mission areas of their order. So the bottom line is both of them have tremendous experience of the love of God and a tremendous desire to return that love to God. And so the prayer that they're primarily focused on is not so much a lot of words, but a prayer of affection, a prayer of love, a prayer of presence, a prayer of being aware of God's presence. And many of you know the story of the castle of the soul, where Teresa of Avila talks about your soul is almost like this castle or this diamond, and the closer you get to Christ, the further into the castle that you go, there is the presence of the Lord, and that he dwells with you. And then in some of her later prayers, she'll talk about how the presence of the Trinity is within her, and she's conscious of this, of the three persons, which is quite something to think about. So the two things that I wanted to read for you today are maybe not as commonly known, although they might be known by people who bothered to read about Teresa, but I wanted to talk about this one from Teresa of Avila, which is about the wound of love, which in her scale of how things flow comes before spiritual betrothal. And this picture by Bernini, of Bernini's sculpture, I should say, is in Rome at the Santa Maria del Vittore Chapel in Rome, and you can see it. And one of my friends told me, make sure if you go to Rome that you get to see that. It's just absolutely breathtaking. And it's an attempt to picture, or in sculpture show, the ecstasy experience of Teresa of Avila as she experiences spiritually her heart being pierced by an arrow. And so she says, I saw close to me toward my left side an angel in bodily form. I don't usually see angels in bodily form, but I see the vision in the following way. The angel was not large but small. He was very beautiful, and his face was so aflame that he seemed to be one of those very sublime angels that appear to be all afire. He might have been a cherubim. I don't know. I saw in his hands a large golden dart, and at the end of the iron tip there appeared to be a little fire. It seemed to me this angel plunged the dart several times into my heart, and that it reached deep within me. When he drew it out, I thought he was carrying off with him the deepest part of me, and he left me all on fire with great love of God. The pain was so great that it made me moan, and the sweetness this greatest pain caused me was so superabundant that there is no desire capable of taking it away. Nor is the soul content with less than God. The pain is not bodily, but spiritual, although the body doesn't fail to share in some of it, and even a great deal. The loving exchange that takes place between the soul and God is so sweet that I beg him in his goodness to give a taste of this love to anyone who thinks I'm lying. And that you can find, actually, you know how the saints, they make relics of them, and sometimes you hear there's a bone here and there's something else here. Well, her heart is in a monastery in Alba and Daytoma, and it shows that literally the heart is pierced. So that's one story. Okay. So this selection is from Teresa of Lisieux, and it's from her act of oblation, her offering of herself to the Lord in love. In order to live in one single act of perfect love, I offer myself as a victim of Holocaust to your merciful love, asking you to consume me incessantly, allowing the waves of infinite tenderness shut up within you to overflow into my soul, and that thus I may become a martyr of your love, O my God. May this martyrdom, after having prepared me to appear before you, finally cause me to die, and may my soul take its flight without any delay into the eternal embrace of your merciful love. I want, O my beloved, at each beat of my heart, to renew this offering to you an infinite number of times, until the shadows having disappeared, I may be able to tell you of my love in an eternal face-to-face. So these two saints, in their great experience of being loved by God, return their love to God, to the church, and to the work of the church. I hope you enjoy this, and if you're interested, maybe down the line I could do a longer presentation, because of course there's lots and lots to know about Teresa of Avila. Thank you.